Welcome, everybody, to a new edition of Inside Boxing Daily. I am your host, and the only host for the show tonight, Jeremiah Preisser. I want to welcome everybody in. Of course, I got to let you guys know from the get-go that we're brought to you by betnow.eu. Go to the website, click on the banner, enter Truth50, and use some of this money to make a bet. I know a lot of us have high opinions of our own opinions and whatnot, and think we could probably place bets better than we probably actually do. But we're also brought to you by the Retired Boxers Foundation. Jackie Richardson, Alex Ramos, good people doing stuff for guys who just, they don't have 401k plans, much financial backup at all. So, and also we're brought to you by Seat Giant. If you got boxing tickets to buy, you're going somewhere, head on over there and, And so we're going to have a short show tonight. Of course, there's not a whole lot going on. I mean, I was watching Michael Montero's show earlier, and he's just spot on. I mean, there's just not a whole lot to chit-chat about until these fights crystallize. I mean, there's a lot of talk about, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. There's just not enough that's been materialized to really chat about, to, get excited about, and you know how it goes in boxing. I mean, there's just a lot of gossip that goes on because we're still waiting on things. So yeah, we've all got to take to Twitter and argue, and it's the water cooler. Twitter. I'm not a big Twitter guy, but it's the water cooler for sports. A lot of people are chit chatting, but it's just not a lot going on. And so I'm just going to, what I see in boxing scene and other places, I'm just going to try to run with that. So a few things that I saw was, Austin Trout was trying to go down to 147, and he wanted to target Danny Garcia. Now, I think it's a stupid plan. I mean, Austin Trout is a guy that I have a lot of respect for. I think he was pretty damn good in his prime. I know when he fought Canelo Alvarez, you don't hear much controversy about the fight itself because I think the majority believe that Canelo won, but there are some good boxing people who actually scored that for Austin Trout. And I think by and large it was because of his work rate. He did seem to he was throwing the more punches. So it was one of those. I think for them it was like Cliff Rold, for instance, who's hardcore boxing fan, helps run one of the founding members of Transnational Rankings, a bona fide boxing guy. I believe he scored it. He edged it for Austin Trout. But Trout is far removed from that. He's been in a lot of tough fights since then, and he's taken on a lot of tough guys after that fight. I mean, I got to tip my hat to him because he's been one of the consistent guys in the sport who's willing to fight anybody and everybody. And I love that. I mean, there's just not enough of that anymore. And I think because of it, he's probably doing well financially, though physically it seems to be a little bit of a different story because he's still a quality operator. When he fought Terrell Geisha in his last fight, he wasn't, there wasn't a huge gap in talent there, but you could see that Austin Trout is no longer really all that close to his prime. I mean, he's damaged goods. He's not as quick. He's not as slick. You could just see, his feet, they're not under him like they used to be. He's not as quick on the trigger. And he's still going to collect paydays because he's such a consistent guy, but it's just a bad plan. I mean, we saw how that worked out with, who was it? Curtis Stevens, when he dropped down and fought Wailo Matosa, he looked shot. And going down to fight Danny Garcia, I just think is a bad option. I mean, if he makes 154 comfortably, if he wants to move down, that's fine. But, going into a fight with somebody like Danny Garcia, he's just over his head at this point. And I'm not exactly sure why he's targeting Danny. I don't know. Maybe see something in him stylistically that he can exploit. But again, it just doesn't make much sense to me. He's just over his head. If he's going to continue fighting, because again, you got to let these guys do what they want to do. I mean, they have autonomy over their own bodies. And I know there are some people who wish there was some sort of intervention system where, a commission or something could say, hey, that's enough. The tires are balding. You've put too much tread on them, too much wear and tear. It's time for you to exit gracefully, but, that's not the way it works. And I'm not going to make some philosophical argument either way. The point is that people can do as they wish. And so, he's just going to keep on fighting. And if he continues to do so, I'd like to see him in against somebody lesser, somebody more of the Terrell Gay show, less than that, of course, but, somebody around that. He needs to stick with, like fringe contenders and whatnot right now, because he's clearly not a world-class operator. But again, he seems like a nice guy, a lot of respect. He just doesn't have it anymore. Anyway, somebody who does seem to have it is Nordine Oubaali, a guy who I've wrote an article about. So somebody I think is a high quality operator. I like his style. He's a southpaw. He's well rounded. Good hand speed, good power. Can throw in combination. Has good accuracy. He's somebody who went to the game a little bit late, but that's because he had a long amateur background. Then he fought all sorts of interesting names when he was down there. Like one of his professional opponents, Rashi Warren. But he's a good fighter. I like him quite a bit. And he's going to be taking on Inoue's younger brother. The kid's only 23 years old, 13-0, only 3 knockouts. Takuma Inoue. And, Inoue is he's a good fighter. I believe he's ranked inside the top 10. Pretty classy boxer. Doesn't really light it up in terms of style or anything, but he's good. He's earned his placement. I think that's justifiable, but he's, because of his lack of power, he's obviously not blowing guys away like his big brother is, and I think that's going to be a problem here. Oubaali is a good hitter. He's not a great hitter. I'd say he's one of the better punchers at 118, but he's not up there with Louis Neary, Nonito Donaire, Inoue, who I've already mentioned. I would say he's more on the level of like a Tay, but I'm not quite sure. I'm not sure he hits that hard yet, but he's around there. He's not elite, but he's close. But yeah, I just don't think Inoue has enough to keep Oubaali off of him. Oubaali has significantly more experience, both in the amateur ranks and the professional ranks. And it just seems as if it's just too soon for him. In fact, I'm not sure he would ever get it done anyway, so what the hell, maybe it is best to just try and get it done now. I'd seen this fight coming. I think I even mentioned on a previous show that I had seen this fight coming because there was chit chat about it. I think immediately after Oubaali's last fight, so it's no surprise. But again, I think Inoue is he's lacking the pop. So it's going to be tough for him to keep Oubaali off of him. And I just think Oubaali's he's just got too much for him. He's just too well-rounded. He's got power, which has already been mentioned, but he's got speed. He's got good footwork. He's got damn good balance. I'm not convinced that he's one of the very best operators at 118, but he looks as if he's around the level of Ryan Burnett and Tay, but just as his power is, he's a notch below the very best, like Inoue. And I think he's also probably a notch below Neary as well, though I think he's closer. So yeah, I think Oubaali is likely. I think it's likely he's going to get a stoppage, but a points verdict is probably what I'm leaning toward at the moment. Though I'm not sure. Even at this stage, Inoue is good, But to me, I think to myself, is he as slick as somebody like Rashid Warren? I don't think so. Warren is one of those guys who consistently falters at the highest of levels, minus the Payano rematch. But Warren is one of the more decorated amateurs in American history. And he doesn't get a lot of credit for it because he's a small guy. And a lot of attention is not given to that weight class. But, I mean, he went to 3 Olympics. And he understands the game. He's one of the fastest handed fighters in the game. He's slick when he wants to be. He just his mentality gets too caught up in fighting as opposed to just being on his bicycle and moving consistently. And I think if he did choose to be a pure boxer, he'd be a more of a handful for these guys than he is. He just wants to fight too much. But the thing is, Inoue, to me, I just don't think he's as good as Rashid Warren. And so he's just not as slick. He doesn't have the defensive radar that Warren does. So I see a stoppage here, probably late. Oubaali's been getting it done against good opposition. And that's my prediction. I think it's probably going to be a late round stoppage. I know I was thinking points, but I'm going to go back on that after evaluating a little bit further. But of course, a lot of people would like to see Inoue's younger brother do well for himself with all the press that Inoue has been getting, but I just don't see it happening. And even if Inoue does pull through, it's just kind of one of those things where it's just a matter of time. And I think he's going to be viewed as the lowest hanging fruit there because of all the guys that hold a trinket. I think he's going to be the weakest. Anyways, we're going to move to On This Day, and I'm going to start with a genuine fight in Fernando Vargas versus Ross Thompson. This was at 154. I think it was for some alphabet soup belt. And, this one was Vargas was in his prime. He was a damn good fighter. Yeah, not a great fighter, but he was close. I mean, I know he got a close and somewhat controversial decision over Winky Wright. But no matter how you saw that fight, I haven't seen anybody I can't remember anybody, I guess, who said that the decision was a robbery. And I've seen the fight. To me, it seemed close enough to where you could go either way. Wright was pretty defensive. It's not always a good look for the judges when you put your guard up and you block. And so to me, it seemed as if it could have went either way. No real controversy on my part, about who won the fight. But Vargas was a damn good fighter. And before the low blows against Felix Trinidad, had those never happened, I know a lot of people who think that those low blows, really, just turn the tide completely in Felix Trinidad's favor. And maybe they did. It's a big what if, but Trinidad was Vargas was, I think, on the level of Felix Trinidad. It was a very close fight. Until the later rounds. But, Vargas fought somebody a bit softer this time at Ross Thompson. And I had watched that fight before I even got on air. I hadn't seen it in a long time, probably since it actually happened. And Vargas was just clearly too good. He was just, clearly a notch above Ross Thompson. Thompson was a good fighter, but he just lacked a jab. I mean, he kept trying to counterpunch Fernando Vargas, and he just kept eating leads. In the very first round, he did okay, but Vargas was mixing his leads up pretty well. He was going to the body, he was throwing in combination. It was a couple straight right hands that he threw that Ross just didn't seem like he had the timing down. He couldn't get out of the way of. He just kept eating him. And eventually he got fooled with a left hook right hand combination. And I think about 45 minutes or 45 seconds in round number 3, got put on the canvas. And Joe Cortez was refereeing that bout, let it go on. And you could see that Ross was clearly hurt. It wasn't one of those flash knockdowns. And And, Vargas just jumped all over him. And to his credit, he did a good job because Ross was mindful enough to try and get in the clinch, but Vargas was also on his game where he kept working with his free hand, kept trying to get out of the clinches, and he did a good enough job to where he actually scored a knockdown before the end of round 3. And then once round 4, once the bell started for that round, he came out firing, just didn't pull any punches, got right to his, finishing the job, and got him out of there. And Cortez was right in stopping the fight, and it was a pretty good win. I mean, it's one of those things that it feels nondescript, where it doesn't really seem as if it enhances Fernando Vargas's legacy. But it's still tough. I mean, it's tough because whenever you're fighting somebody, and this is why I hate the alphabet soup belts, but I still acknowledge that I still think there's some value in alphabet soup fights, and I say that because the perception among boxers and promoters and whatnot is this is a world championship, so their game is stepped up a bit in this sort of environment. So Ross Thompson probably trained his ass off, harder than he ever done at any point in his life, and even when you're a world class fighter, it can be tough to stave off challengers even of that level continuously. It's just hard to maintain that dedication, and sometimes stylistically they just they're tough for you. I mean, we see guys who are on higher levels struggle with that guy all the time. I mean, look at Felix Sturm, for instance, when he fought, Randy Griffin. I mean, nobody really knew who the hell Randy Griffin was, maybe besides a few people in his hometown or, some people in his household, but he fought, Felix Sturm tooth and nail. And we saw that Felix Sturm was good enough to beat Oscar De La Hoya. I know he didn't get the decision, but come on, just bear with me here. No other sports are official decisions, so, frowned upon than they are in boxing, just because they're, the way it's conducted. But yeah, I mean, guys like Randy Griffin, could give Felix Sturm, who's, a guy who ended up proving that he had good longevity and did beat some good fighters. It's not that Sturm was not a good fighter. He did beat some good guys. But yeah, it's just one of those things. Like even when you're an elite level fighter, you can struggle with guys who are good, but nothing special. And this wasn't one of those cases, of course, but I just wanted to point that out. I wanted to put things into context because we're often, boxing fans they can be hypercritical, and if so-and-so who's elite doesn't have a fantastic performance against some guy he's expected to blow out, all of a sudden, red flags are up everywhere, and, people are shitting on his legacy or shitting on his style or whatever it may be. And I mean, boxing is just a very difficult game. It's, you often hear in the NFL that it's a game of inches, but boxing is much more so than that. I mean, think about it. When you're fighting somebody, there's hundreds of potential transactions going on between you and another person, like punch transactions. And to misread one of those it's not a sin. You see what I'm saying is that when somebody's constantly throwing punches at you, and if they're good and they're masking it a little bit with feints or hand position or whatever it may be, it's not a sin. I mean, we've seen great fighters get knocked out by people that we barely remember in history. I mean, my friend Buddy Gibbs wrote a piece about Leonard Morrow, who almost nobody talks about, but he knocked Archie Moore out in the first round, and Moore made excuses for it later on in his career, but the fact is he just got caught. And it can happen. Again, when you have especially back in the day, when you have 100+ fights and you just do the math there. And again, I'm no mathematician, but you do the math there. And when you have, tons of 8, 10, 12, 15 round fights, and there's hundreds, sometimes over 1,000 punches being thrown in these fights. It's just it's too hard to avoid these. I mean, sometimes your radar is not going to function properly, and you're going to get caught. And sometimes your chin's not that good, and that's the end of it. It's again, I think we just have to be a bit. I think we just have to be a bit more forgiving in some of these guys' performances, and we shouldn't. I think we should just be a bit more charitable in how we see these performances sometimes. It doesn't always mean what we think it means. I mean, you see a guy like Alexander Gavodstik, and he gets dropped by Tommy Karpency, and so a lot of people didn't give him shit for that, but it's just an example of things that happen in the sport, and people write a guy off altogether because of something like that. I don't think it's the right way to do it. We just need to be a bit more charitable in our interpretations of these things sometimes, and of fighters' abilities. Anyways, there's my tangent for the night. I'm going to move on to something else, something a bit more, I don't know if it's more interesting, but I did just want to mention that it's also the anniversary, as Vargas and Thompson is, but it's also the anniversary of Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor. I'm not going to go into this fight very much. It was just a big money-making scheme, and, I feel a little bit for people who actually paid for it, because it just wasn't worth it. I mean, the whole thing was a sham. It was a big money grab, and the only thing that I really want to touch on is that I knew a number of people, because Conor McGregor, say what you will, he's a great shit talker. He can sell things. A lot of people are attracted to him because he's Irish, right? I mean, there's a lot of people who identify as Irish in the United States. They've proven to be one of the loyal groups who will support a fighter, and it's just, there's a lot of attraction there because of his Irish heritage. And, he had a lot of people convinced, a lot of people that I knew, who didn't follow boxing at all. He had a lot of people convinced who did follow MMA that he had a chance. I told somebody this today. There are people at work who were asking if it was worth paying for, and, whether McGregor really had a chance. And, a lot of people get caught up in their feelings, and they want somebody to win. They're hoping, and when they get caught up, and of course your heart is not doing the thinking, but we'll just use that because people are familiar with the term. But when you use your heart to predict things, a lot of times it turns out pretty poorly, because you're not thinking most rationally. There's plenty of that. I mean, I was talking to Brits who were saying that tons of the British public were convinced that Ricky Hatton was going to beat Floyd Mayweather, and it's not as if he didn't account himself well. That's not the point. But what I'm saying is, people get sentimental, and then they start siding with their sentimental favorite, and then they start thinking of all these examples where it's possible. And I saw a lot of that with Conor McGregor, with some of the people who watch MMA, and it's just, I told him, it's not happening. It's not going to happen. I mean, nothing is impossible. Floyd Mayweather was not the most active guy. You never know when a guy like that is going to hit the wall. But I told people, even if he's shot to shit, he's going to win the fight. I know a lot of people say it's two completely different sports, and I don't know. I've never really done MMA. I've sparred with an MMA guy too, and you can see that their footwork is a bit different. They typically square themselves more because they have to defend against takedowns, and the posture is different. The approach is different too. There's not as much nuance in MMA as there is with something specific. If I watch Muay Thai or boxing, that's part of the reason why I love it, is there's just a lot of nuance in just doing something with your hands, or with Muay Thai with your elbows and your feet. You know what I mean? If you practice one thing and do that thing over and over again, you have to think within a more narrow spectrum, And from that, you're able to create these interesting ideas that a lot of people who are more jack of all trades don't. They don't typically need. So some people pick them up and they do well. And there are some guys in MMA who have developed some competency in boxing, like Conor McGregor, for instance. But by and large, you don't see it. But yeah, that's my point. Is a lot of people were reading too much into it and thinking that Conor McGregor actually had a shot, and he just didn't. I told everybody it's just not happening. No matter how much you like him, it's just not happening. And besides it being a big money grab, and the tickets and the way the media, and then bragging about all the the movie stars and actors and actresses and musicians that were ringside. It was just all a big farce to me. I mean, it's cool, but these people are turning out for the spectacle and not necessarily for the performance itself or the love of the sports. Of course, there's a few people who are hardcore followers of the boxing or MMA, but you could just see that they weren't hardcore followers. I mean, I've heard some of the interviews of some of the guys that they say are big boxing fans, and you ask them, they put these guys on the spot, on the camera, put a mic in their face, and they're saying, hey, who are you predicting? What do you see? And they just give these bullshit answers, and sometimes there's ambiguity in them where you can read either way. He's like, well, I really like this guy because he's a hard hitter, and then but this other guy he's good too. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about, man? You don't follow the sport closely if those are the answers that you're giving. You may watch a sport, but you sure as fuck don't understand it when you're saying shit like that. But anyways, that's my rant. That's my ramble. I'm going to get out of here. So I thank everybody who listens to this. Again, all the time. Whether you send me good messages, bad messages, I don't care, man. I just appreciate the feedback. Mike and I have been doing this podcast for over 3+ years now. I think, nearly 3.5 years, getting pretty close to it. And, yeah, I appreciate it. So if you want to send me a message or send me an email or find me on Facebook, just type in Jeremiah Preisser. I think you'll see me in a Young Griffo shirt. It's black. Got long hair in the picture. Send me a friend request. Chit chat. Chop it up online and get to know one another. Anyways, as always, we're brought to you by Bet Now, Truth 50. Use the promo code, please. Seat Giant and the Retired Boxers Foundation. So for Jeremiah Preisser, I'm your host for tonight. Have a good one.